Good evening, Reverend Fathers, brothers and sisters in Christ. My name is Evangelos Sotiropoulos. I belong to this parish for more than 20 years. I'm very honored and welcome everybody here this evening for a very special homily from a very special friend and a special guest. In a few minutes, I'll call Father Sophronios, our parish priest, to introduce Father John. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention a few words about tonight's event, which is being sponsored by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of Canada, of course, and in conjunction with the Ecumenical Patriarchate Archons in Canada, with the blessing of His Eminence Archbishop Sophronios. It is a great honor and blessing that we have Father John Chryssavgis with us this evening for a very special homily. A Patriarch of Saints is what we've titled it, and he'll be discussing the holy men and women of the Church who have been or soon will be officially in the catalog of saints of the Orthodox Church. Father John Chryssavgis, as many of you may know, his accomplishments run long. If I was to start and finish, I would probably be here for more than the homily itself. I would note a few things. He's an archdeacon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. He's the official biographer of His All Holiness. He wrote the biography titled Bartholomew, which was published in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, Father. He's the author of numerous books about the Ecumenical Patriarchate, about the sacred sites in Constantinople, many spiritual articles in various journals, in Greek, in English, online, in written form. He has contributed significantly not only to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, but also to the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. Although I should mention, so I don't get in trouble, he's originally from Australia, our friend from down under. We're very honored and pleased to have him with us. For those of you who don't come to St. Nicholas regularly, he will also be here tomorrow for the Divine Liturgy, and will provide a homily on the Gospel of Luke. I think tomorrow is the 13th Sunday of Luke. We thank you, Father. We're honored that you're with us. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to learning from you. And most importantly, we look forward to learning about the saints of our church who drive us, like everyone should be driven, to the only person that matters, who is Christ, our Lord and Savior, and to be filled with His grace and His love as the example of the saints that we'll hear about this evening. So thank you once again. Thank you to everyone for taking their time of their busy Saturday evening to be with us. And at this point, I'd like to call Father Sophronios to say a few words in Greek and to welcome officially Father John to the podium.
Πανοσυλλογιότατη και δεσμολογιότατη, γερολογιότατε, άρχοντες του Οικουμενικού μας Πατριαρχείου, αγαπητοί μου αδελφοί, έχω την μεγάλη χαρά και την μεγάλη ευλογία να καλωσορίσω στην Εκκλησία μας, στην κοινότητά μας και στην πόλη μας τον ιερολογιότατο Αρχιδιάκονο του Οικουμενικού Θρόνου, Πατέρα Ιωάννη Chryssavgis, ο οποίος μας έκανε την μεγάλη τιμή και μας δίνει την μεγάλη χαρά να βρίσκεται απόψε μαζί μας. Και σκεφτόμουν, ιερολογιότατε, ότι επειδή γνωρίζοντας την ευαισθησία που μοιράζεστε με τον Πατριάρχη μας, τον πράσινο Πατριάρχη μας για τα θέματα του περιβάλλοντος, τις ίδιες δηλαδή ανησυχίες που κατά βάθος όλοι μας μοιραζόμαστε, και βλέποντας κανείς αυτά τα προβλήματα που επηρεάζουν τόσο πολύ τις ζωές μας εξαιτίας της κλιματικής αλλαγής και του περιβάλλοντος, και βλέποντας κανείς τον κόσμο, τις καταστάσεις της ξηρασίας, τις πλημμύρες, τους παγετώνες, τους καύσωνες, τις ξηρασίες, αυτομάτως το μυαλό μου επήγε σήμερον στην πνευματική κλιματική αλλαγή και στα μεγάλα προβλήματα του πνευματικού περιβάλλοντος, με εικόνες θλιβερές, με εικόνες ψυχικής ξηρασίας, με εικόνες ψυχικής πλημμύρας, με εικόνες πνευματικής ξηρασίας και πνευματικών καυσώνων, και έχουμε τόσο πολύ μεγάλη ανάγκη, γερολογιότατε, να ακούσουμε λόγων θεολογικών, λόγων πατρικών, λόγων στοργικών από άνθρωπο που έχει ατόφια την θεολογική σπουδή, από άνθρωπον ο οποίος εκφράζει ατόφια την θεολογία, διαστόματος βεβαίως της πρωτοθρόνου Εκκλησίας του Οικουμενικού μας Πατριαρχείου. Έχουμε τόσο πολύ ανάγκη πνευματική να ακούσουμε τέτοιων λόγων για να εξισορροπήσει η κλιματική αλλαγή μέσα μας και γύρω μας. Και δια τούτου σας ευχαριστούμε και σας ευγνωμονούμε που διευχών του Σεβασμιωτάτου μας ήλθατε και κάνετε τον κόπο να ταξιδέψετε από την πόλη, την όμορφη, και να είστε σήμερα εδώ κοντά μας και να ακούσουμε τον λόγον σας, και πάλιν και πολλάκις σας καλωσορίζουμε και ευχαριστούμε για άλλη μια φορά που βρίσκεστε κοντά μας. Και βεβαίως θα ήθελα να πω με αισθήματα στεναχώριας ότι ο μικρός αριθμός που είμαστε εδώ των ανθρώπων αποδεικνύει ακριβώς το πρόβλημα αυτό της πνευματικής κλιματικής αλλαγής και προβλημάτων που κυριαρχεί μέσα μας και γύρω μας. Γερολογιότατε, καλώς ήλθατε.
Καλησπέρα σας. Θα μιλήσω όσο επιτοπλίστων στα αγγλικά, αλλά ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω πρώτα απ' όλα τον Σεβασμιότατο ημενάρχη σας, τον Αρχιεπίσκοπο Σωτήριο, που τόσο τον εκτιμώ και σέβομαι, για την πολύ ευγενική πρόσκλησή του να είμαι μαζί σας απόψε, όπως επίσης και τον Άρχοντα, κ. Σωτηρόπουλο, για την επιμονή του να με φέρει στο Τορόντο. Ευχαριστώ και τον πατέρα Φανούριο για τον τρόπο που συνέδεσε την εργασία, την διακονία του Παναγιωτάτου για το περιβάλλον και το θέμα της απόψινής ομιλίας. Και την κυρία Τασία, δεν ξέρω πού είναι, πίσω, για την πολύ έτσι γενναιόδερη φιλοξενία στην πόλη σας και στην κοινότητά σας. Μου ζητήθηκε να μιλήσω για τον Πατριάρχη των Αγίων. Όταν σκεπτόμαστε τον Οικουμενικό Πατριάρχη, ο νους μας συνήθως στρέφεται γύρω σε διάφορα πράγματα, όπως την ιστορία και την ομορφιά του Βυζαντίου. Αυτό που ίσως δεν γνωρίζουν οι περισσότεροι είναι ότι τα τελευταία χρόνια ο Παναγιώτατος και η Σύνοδος, η Ιερά Σύνοδος στο Πατριαρχείο, αναγνώρισε γύρω στους 250 Αγίους, σύγχρονους και παλαιούς. Άμα κοιτάξει κανείς τον κατάλογο των Αγίων, είναι αρκετά εντυπωσιακό να δει κανείς τόσους Αγίους. Βέβαια, συμπεριλαμβάνω σε αυτό το κατάλογο και 150 μάρτυρες από την Ταού Πεντέλη και άλλες ομάδες μαρτύρων, αλλά μιλάμε για πολλούς Αγίους. When we call to mind the Ecumenical Patriarch, we probably spontaneously visualize the beauty of the Phanar or the history of Constantinople. Perhaps we picture the Patriarch presiding over the Holy and Great Council or facilitating Orthodox unity. What most of us seldom recall is the relationship of the Patriarch with Mount Athos, first of all, or his presiding role in the Holy and Sacred Synod that recognizes saints, contemporary saints. But in actual fact, these two dimensions, the more external one of the Patriarch among the Orthodox hierarchs, and the more internal one, the Patriarch in Synod, are very closely interrelated, even intertwined. Because promoting unity or building conciliarity is not just a job description for the Patriarch. It comes from a very long and rich tradition of prayer, of liturgy, of spirituality. The Patriarch persistently works for unity among Orthodox Christians, also through prayer and spirituality, through the canonization of saints. That's his silent way, if you like, of reaching out to Orthodox faithful throughout the world. But most people are actually unaware of just how many saints, men and women, have been canonized during the Patriarch's tenure. A quick glance, for instance, at the journal, the official journal of the Patriarchate, Orthodoxia, reveals a startling number of new saints in nearly 3 decades. Since the Patriarch assumed office, there have been over 25 formal acts of recognition for almost 250 saints from Greece and Russia and Asia Minor and Western Europe. Αυτό που θα ήθελα να προτείνω απόψε είναι ότι, ή μάλλον να ενώσω απόψε, είναι ότι η αναγνώριση των Αγίων από την Ιερά Σύνοδο έχει άμεση σχέση καταρχήν με τον καθαγιασμό του Αγίου Μύρου, που μέχρι στιγμής έχει τελέσει 3 φορές ο Παναγιώτατος. So Patriarch Bartholomew's formal acts of canonization are, I think, integrally related to his blessing of the Holy Miron, over which he has presided on 3 occasions, in 92, in 2002, and 2012. In fact, the word saint has its etymological root from the Latin sanctus, which stems from the word consecrate. So like the consecration of Holy Miron that unites all Orthodox Christians through the oil of chrismation, acts of canonization are not just a commemoration of the death of some holy individual, but the festive evidence of church unity. The saints are signs that the vision of God has been revealed in the eyes of at least one human person in the world in our generation. Because if this occurs, then the face of God can be reflected in the face of all human beings. Now, Orthodox saints are recognized by the conscience of the faithful, and then they are registered in the festive book of saints, the Eortologion. No one is made a saint, but saintliness is informally perceived by the community and then formally proclaimed by the church. And while canonization hinges more on the solemn act of proclamation, we're all waiting for the next synod meeting to see which of the saints will be canonized. The canonization process actually begins with a nomination by the local community to their bishop. It may be in a city, maybe in a village, or it may be in a monastery. And from there to the Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, all of this on the basis of a long-standing process that dates back to 1931. And because of the popular or the lay dimension of this process, that it begins from us as a community, the main purpose of the institutional decision is actually to avoid extremes, to avoid exploitation, where enthusiasm can easily develop into enterprise and boldness into brazenness. Sometimes zealous disciples will recognize a holy man or woman as a saint before their death. Sometimes they will even construct churches in their honor before their canonization. In the 10th century, for instance, we have two examples. One, you have a church dedicated in her memory, Saint Irene Chryssavgis, who was popularly canonized immediately after her death, before the official church had canonized her. Or St. Simeon the New Theologian, again in the 10th century. He was actually accused of personally canonizing his spiritual father while he was still living. So this is the only reason why there's a formal process in the church. And the process cites three conditions for canonization: blameless Orthodox faith, acquisition of virtues, including martyrdom, and manifestation of miracles. But even if, and I think it's wrong that today we look for miracles, or we fantasize about miracles, the main treatise that we have on canonization in the church, which is by Manuel Gedeon, who died in 1943, an archivist and chronicler, a historian of the great Church of Christ. That treatise, that text, makes no mention of miracles at all, because the understanding is it's the miraculous life of the saint that is the distinctive characteristic for the saint. Saints are those who lead a good life in good faith, even if they perform no miracles. Think of St. John the Baptist, according to Jesus, the greatest prophet ever to be born, nowhere described as performing any miracles. And Christ emphasized that his disciples will be known not by their miracles, but by their love for one another. In fact, even the formal act of proclamation, what we receive from the Patriarchate, is almost of secondary importance. There are many saints about whom Orthodox themselves are not always certain if there was ever an official decree. And also, since 1931, the recognition of saints has been incorporated liturgically at the Patriarchate, where the act of canonization is read during liturgy. And so commemoration and celebration of the saints are one and the same. In the early church, a saint was recognized simply by being mentioned in liturgy. So there's only really one aim that the church has in proclaiming saints. It's to present to us accessible models of the spiritual life, prototypes of saintliness. A new period of recognition of saints begins at the Patriarchate in 1955, during the time of Ecumenical Patriarch Athinagoras, under whom 9 new saints were added. That was already at that time considered a large number of saints. 9 new saints during the tenure of Athinagoras added to the list of saints, the Agiologion, sparking what was considered at the time a renewal of Orthodox spirituality. There was a reason for this, because this was also the time of the decimation of the Greek community in Istanbul, with the destruction of homes and businesses, the looting of churches. Sparked by political problems later in Cyprus, even more of the demoralized Greeks and Orthodox members of the community in Istanbul emigrated from Turkey. Some of the new saints canonized by Athanagoras included Saint Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, who edited the Philokalia, Saint Cosmas the Etolos, that fiery preacher to whose memory your monastery is dedicated, Saint Nectarios of Pentapolis, very popular and beloved saint, and the Mytilenean saints, Raphael, Nikolaos, and the 12-year-old Irene, who martyred during the Ottoman period. When he was Metropolitan of Philadelphia's, Patriarch Bartholomew actually published an article on the importance of that development during Athenagoras' time. And of course, in his own tenure, Patriarch Bartholomew has proclaimed numerous saints, as we've seen, a pan-Orthodox list of men and women, such as the iconographer Saint Sava the New of Kalymnos, the parish priest Saint Nicholas Planas, Rastislav, the illuminator of Moravia in the 9th century, Stephen of Hungary in the 11th century, the Estonian martyrs Plato, Michael, and Nicholas in the 20th century, and the 20th century great martyr Mother Maria Skoptsova, the female ascetic Sophia Potoukourou, the clairvoyant Father Porphyrios, and also Father Iakovos of Evia, whom we remembered yesterday, soft-spoken Father Paisios, and the humble Father Amphilochios. Όπως γνωρίζουμε, στο πρόσφατο ταξίδι του στο Άγιον Όρος, το περασμένο μήνα, ο Παναγιώτατος ανακοίνωσε ότι σύντομα η Αγία και Ιερά Σύνοδος θα αναγνωρίσει 5 νέους Αγίους που έζησαν στον Άθωνα. Τον πατέρα Ιερώνυμο, Σιμωνοκοτρίτη, τον πατέρα Δανιήλ, Κατουνακιώτη, τον πατέρα Ιωσήφ, τον Ησυχαστή, τον πατέρα Εφραίμ, Κατουνακιώτη, και τον πατέρα Σοφρόνιο του Essex. During his visit to Mount Athos just last month, the 2 dimensions that I mentioned of the Patriarch's outward and inward ministry were strikingly brought together and brought to the surface when he announced the imminent inclusion of 5 Athonite elders among the new saints. Hieronymus of Simonopetra, Daniel Katunakiotis, Joseph the Hesychast, Ephraim Katunakiotis, and Sophrony of Essex. I have to admit that I generally resist describing my personal exchanges with saintly elders. But there's a phrase in the sayings of the Desert Fathers, the Hierondikon, with which I think I can identify and which can excuse my speaking about them this evening. So we read in the Hierondikon, one day Abba Macarius the Egyptian went from Scetis to Nitria for the offering for the liturgy of Abba Hambo. The old man said to him, "Father, say a word to the brethren." And Abba Macarius said, "I have not yet become a monk myself, but I have seen monks." So, I am not a monk, but I have seen monks. During my student years in Athens, I regularly visited Mount Athos, and then following my studies in Oxford, I spent a year there. And I am not a saint, but I have seen saints. I have been privileged to encounter saintly people who shaped my mind, who shaped my ministry in the church. Father Sophrony of Essex, Father Paisios of Athos, Father Porphyrios of Athens, Father Iakovos of Evia, and Father Ephraim of Katunakia, all of whom I would visit as a young student. Now, the association between monks and saints on Mount Athos is very old and very important. Monasticism begins in Egypt, probably on a Sunday morning, possibly in the third week of Great Lent, somewhere in the year maybe 270 or 271. In the congregation, there was a young man called Anthony, who decided to enter the desert, the uninhabited desert. Anthony's step at the time was very little noticed, but when he died at the ripe old age of 106, so he was doing something right, his biographer, Saint Athanasius, says that Anthony's reputation had spread all over the world. The desert became a city, he says. Now, of course, it did not exactly begin like this. Contemporary research shows that Syriac monasticism is at least as old as Egyptian monasticism and actually developed quite independently there. But in Syria and in other places, there is no one person, at least not like Anthony, at least not as Saint Athanasius wrote of Anthony. On Mount Athos, monasticism also starts very early, around the 5th century, with hermits beginning to settle in the more remote areas. Two prominent figures of this time include St. Peter the Athonite, who arrives at the end of the 8th century, and St. Euthymius the Younger, who founds a monastery on Mount Athos around the year 840. By the 10th century, 1,000 years ago, Athonite monasticism develops its own peculiar rhythm, its own chant, its own iconography, its own typikon that we still recognize today, especially after St. Athanasius founded the great Lavra in 963. Over the centuries, with the guidance of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, Mount Athos expands the aura of Byzantine monasticism, opening its doors to pilgrims and monks from Georgia and Serbia and Romania and Bulgaria and Russia, quite apart from Greece and Asia Minor. Now, of course, the 20 monasteries on Mount Athos are self-governed, but their highest authority, their highest spiritual authority, lies in the Ecumenical Patriarch. But Athonite monks sometimes forget this, sometimes conveniently forget this, and guard their autonomy on the basis of ancient imperial protections. But in fact, in its relationship with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the mountain has not always been holy. Monasticism has sometimes proved very tense, very difficult for the church. Of course, both monasticism and the church are not without their weaknesses, but together they preserve the fullness, the richness of the gospel. And so the unresolved tension can serve as positive, even creative as a dynamic. Monastics on the margins of society, like your monastery here, just an hour or so outside of Toronto, remind us that here, as St. Paul says, we have no lasting city. We seek the city which is to come. And the church in the world reminds monastics who sometimes forget that where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, that is where Christ is, in the midst of them. Otherwise, the institutional church can easily be reduced to a secular organization with a focus on authority or ostentation. And monastic circles could be isolated in their charisma, sometimes even conceit. In fact, the very structure of Orthodox monasticism reflects this church in the world, but not of the world, with its three styles or three ways of monastic life. There's the eremitic way, the hermit life, the solitary way, where the model is St. Anthony. There's the cenobitic way, the kynovion, the communal way, where Paisios is the model, again, like Anthony in the 4th century. And there's the semi-eremitic way, or the semi-communal way, right in the middle with Abba Amun, again in the 4th century, as the prototype. And then after Egypt, monasticism shifted to Asia Minor in the late 4th century, to Palestine in the 5th and 6th centuries, to Sinai in the 7th and 8th centuries, to Athos from the 9th and 10th centuries. But these three ways, these three styles of monasticism still exist on Mount Athos today, a remarkable example of continuity in Orthodox monasticism. In fact, I would say that the 5 soon-to-be recognized Athonite saints reflect these three ways. Hieronymus and Sophrony lived in communities, in kynovia. Daniel and Joseph lived in semi-eremitic skeets with small groups of monks. And Ephraim lived as a hermit. Father Vasilios of Iviron Monastery once said, "The saints are our theologians." And that's true. For centuries, monasticism on Mount Athos shaped the paths of continuity and tradition. Over centuries, it produced numerous saints, martyrs, monastics, missionaries. In fact, the first Sunday after the Easter cycle is dedicated to the saints of Mount Athos, an entire Sunday. Mount Athos provided spiritual writers like St. Gregory Palamas, Saints Callistos and Ignatius Xanthopoli, all of these in the Philokalia, and St. Nicodemus, the editor of the Philokalia. And Mount Athos prides itself in master iconographers, from Manuel Panselinos in the 13th century to Theophanes, the Cretan, in the 16th century. The 20th century also has splendid examples. And the three figures I'm going to talk to you about this evening lived on Mount Athos, but they complement one another. Elder Joseph practiced the Jesus prayer unceasingly. Father Sophrony explored the methodology of the Jesus prayer. And Father Paisios, who hardly mentions the Jesus prayer, is clearly filled with the Jesus prayer. Each of them played a vital role in the revival of monasticism in the 20th century. But each of them also reflect the diversity of the ways of the heart, the diversity of the ways of holiness. Let's look at them separately. Father Joseph, I would summarize his life as the depth of the heart. The biography of Father Joseph describes him as a legitimate continuator of the patristic tradition. It's part of a tradition. Born in 1898 on the island of Paros, orphaned as a young child, he worked from a tender age to assist his family. And then at the age of 23, he came across the writings of the church fathers and decided to become a monk. He met some Athonite monks in Athens, and they took him to the mountain, where he writes, "I was completely changed. I forgot myself. I was filled with light in my heart, outside and everywhere. The Jesus prayer began to say itself within me, so rhythmically that I was amazed, since I was not making any effort." It was not long before another monk, Father Arsenios, who died in 1984 and whom I was also privileged to meet. Father Arsenios became his inseparable companion. in the search for silence. The two of them would pray for hours, seated on a small wooden stool in a remote cave, focusing their mind on their heart, keeping long vigils, standing for endless hours, fasting rigorously, eating, it's said of Father Joseph, 3 ounces of food at sunset. After wandering for 8 years, the two of them settled at St. Basil's Skeet on Mount Athos. And from there, they moved to a small region in Little St. Anne with 3 small cells, one for Arsenios, one for Joseph, and one for a visiting clergyman who celebrated the liturgy. A small number of close disciples gather around them, and caring for them, Joseph and Arsenios make their final move in 1951 to New Skeet. And that's where the elder died on the 15th of August in 1959, the feast of his beloved Mother of God, during the liturgy. We sometimes think of Father Joseph as a very strict monk, but I think that if you read through his writings, you can see the compassion in this man. He would often say, "Do as you think best." That's not what we normally think of spiritual fathers saying. He also criticized the fashion, I quote, of self-appointed experts speaking about prayer, the uncreated life, deification, and such things. A lot of us fall into that category. And finally, what's of interest to me, since I work with the Patriarch on environmental things, Father Joseph believed that through prayer, even animals and all of creation are reconnected with the Creator. The second person, Father Sophronios, whom I would describe very briefly as the wisdom of the heart. Father Sophronios was born in Tsarist Russia in 1896. He studied fine arts in Moscow, and there he actually developed an interest in Buddhism and Indian culture. I hope that as biographies of him are written, that aspect is not necessarily wiped away. Then with the outbreak of World War I and the subsequent Russian Revolution, Father Sophronios meditated on suffering and truth. By 1921, he emigrated to Europe, traveling through Europe, Germany, France to exhibit his art, but he lost interest in matters intellectual and enrolled in the Orthodox Theological School of Saint Serge in Paris. He abandoned his studies and traveled to Mount Athos, where he entered Saint Panteleimon Monastery. And in 1930, he met Starets Silouan, whom he considered the greatest gift from God. For 8 years, he lived with him. For 8 years, he received spiritual direction from him, until following Saint Silouan's death in 1938, he left Saint Panteleimon for the desert of Mount Athos. It wasn't long before Father Sophronios was called to be a spiritual advisor himself to several monasteries on the mountain, while he was living in a small rock chapel with rigorous conditions of dampness and no heat. After 3 winters, his health failed, which obliged him to journey to France, where surgery crushed any hope of returning to Mount Athos. That's when he published his book, The Biography of Saint Silouan, who was canonized in 1988 by the Patriarchate. In 1958, he founded the community in Essex, in England, and he died in 1993. Like Father Joseph, Father Sophronios is also part of a tradition, part of the tradition of Mount Athos. This is a great culture of the heart, he says. I met this on the holy mountain. There is no ending to this learning. It's impossible to keep silent about it, he says. Impossible to give voice to it. Father Sophronios was also very creative. If you ever attended liturgy with him, you would hear new prayers during the Divine Liturgy that he had written himself. And he also talked about the environment and creation. He says, when you feel the touch of the Spirit in your heart, love streams like a light on all creation, because the Spirit draws the heart to compassion for the whole world. And finally, Father Paisios, whom I would summarize as the breadth of the heart. Born in 1924 in Cappadocia, a region traditionally known for its piety, baptized by his village priest, Father Arsenios, who was canonized as well in 1986. His family fled as refugees from Asia Minor to Greece, settling on the island of Kerkyra, and then in the town of Konitsa in Epirus, where Father Paisios completed his elementary education and his military service. In 1950, he went to Mount Athos. His favorite reading, he says, was the Hierondikon and the writings of Abba Isaac, the Syrian that he kept beneath his pillow at all times in his room. 4 years later, he becomes a monk, and in 1962 goes to Mount Sinai, where he lived for 2 years in a cell that looked right over the burning bush inside St. Catherine's Monastery. The Bedouins in the area loved Father Paisios because he would offer them food that he purchased with income from the crosses that he would carve from wood. In 1964, he goes back to Mount Athos, settling in the skeet of Iviron, where his spiritual father is a charismatic Russian elder, Tikhon. And then in 1968, in what was a revolutionary move, in fact, for the renewal of Mount Athos, Father Paisios encourages one of his closest disciples, Father Vasilios, to restore Stavronikita Monastery. And the two of them together, I remember, visited Australia in 1977, the only time Father Paisios ever traveled abroad. In 1979, Father Paisios moved to Panavuda, the last cell where he lived on the mountain, and there he directed numerous visitors seeking advice in person or advice by correspondence. There was a key that would be suspended by wire from his private cell, the balcony there, to the property fence, and he'd pass the key down to welcome people inside the fence to sit around him in a circle and listen. Otherwise, if he would not answer the gate, using pencil and paper that was inside a small bottle outside the gate, people left notes, and they would share their problems, or share names for prayer, or share donations for the needy. Father Paisios was like a magnet that absorbed and transformed human pain. In 1966, experiencing breathing problems that led to hospitalization in Thessaloniki, Father Paisios became acquainted with the convent of St. John the Theologian at Suroti, just outside Thessaloniki. And when in 1988 his health deteriorated when he was diagnosed with liver and lung cancer, it was the same nuns who nursed him until his death in 1994. Father Paisios, too, is part of a long tradition, though. It's more than just a historical lineage. It's an unbroken heritage, almost like an apostolic succession. He writes about the apostles. He says, "We are not inferior to the apostles. The apostles were physically close to Christ, but we too have Christ inside us from a very young age through the grace of baptism." In fact, Father Paisios is one of very few ascetics whether in the present or even through the centuries, very few ascetics who underlines the sacraments, especially baptism. And his advice is very simple, usually. I'm quoting him. Think positively. It's more important, he says, to develop good thoughts than to be guided by a spiritual father who's considered a living saint. One single positive thought equals an all-night vigil on Mount Athos. And like Father Joseph and Father Sophronios, Father Paisios' life is full of stories about his love and his connection to animals. My mind tells me, he writes, that even animals are better than I am. So I humble myself before them. And this is something that I enjoy very much. He says, ecological destruction is taking place. Those who can write about it should write about it. I like that. But why recognize saints? Why canonize saints? What does it mean? How does it affect us? How does it affect believers? How does it affect unbelievers? Because the truth is, as Orthodox Christians, sometimes we raise people to sainthood, and sometimes we like to punish people with excommunication. So what is sanctity? What new perspective beyond goodness, beyond good deeds, can saints bring to our lives? There are many connotations that the word saint conjures in various people and places. And the reason for this lies partly in the mystification that surrounds the lives of saints. Saints need to be somehow demystified. What do I mean by that? Sanctity, holiness, needs to be unpacked, because saints are not superhuman and saints are not subdivine. They are human. They are truly human. They are fully human. In fact, they are only human. And that's the main reason that they attract God's grace. Saints are not just victors of some military sort, which is how we think of many of the older saints. They're not heroes of some mythical force, which is how we sometimes think of medieval saints. And they're certainly not superstars with magical powers, which is how we sometimes think of contemporary saints. Σε μία φράση θα έλεγα, Άγιοι είναι αυτοί που γνωρίζουν και μετέχουν στην αγιότητα του Θεού, που είναι ο μόνος Άγιος, όπως λέμε στη λειτουργία, που μόνος αυτός αναπαύεται στους Αγίους. When we speak of God's holiness, we're talking about God's differentness, his otherness. God is unknowable. God is inaccessible. We can never understand God. We can never canonize God. When we speak of saints, of holy people, of spiritual heroes, we're referring to that divine holiness as something shared by humanity, showered on the whole world. Saints are able to discern the divine presence in the world, on behalf of the world, for the life of the world. And through this lens, a saint is someone who is ultimately pervaded by God's love, passionate about God's creation. The saint is never separated from this world. The saint is always at the heart of this world. The saint feels the rhythm of this world, the heartbeat of this world. The saint recognizes traces of holiness and rays of light in everyone's hearts. The saint experiences this tension in the world, not of the world. God inaccessible and God accessible as the cross, which is what shapes the martyrdom, the wisdom, the witness of the saints, as it was in the life of Mother Maria Skobtsova. So let's look at some, very briefly, characteristics of the saints. Who are the saints? Οι Άγιοι ανήκουν σε όλο τον κόσμο, σε ολόκληρη την ανθρωπότητα και σε κάθε καιρό και χρόνο. So there are certain characteristics that belong to all the saints, whoever they are, whenever they lived, wherever they existed. For example, every saint pays attention to persons, not to structures, not to institutions, not to parties or programs or roles. The saint is never impersonal. The saint always loves his or her immediate neighbor, which, by the way, is the most difficult and the most dignified way of living. The saint is also at all times a realist, not a sentimentalist. The saint trusts God in all things and in all circumstances. The saint knows that whatever must be done can only be done here and now. There may be passions, there may be convictions, there may be weaknesses, there may be failures, but all of them occur in the context of what is lasting. And usually, the saint knows this comes with a price. That's why the saint will always struggle against evil to the last breath. The saint never justifies evil, never rationalizes evil, never gives in to evil, never gives space to evil. The saint reminds us that knowledge of grace issues in, first of all, acknowledgement of our own sinfulness. The saint knows that to be perfectly human is to be imperfect. That to be reckoned a saint is the result of recognizing that one is at all times and at best a repentant sinner. There exists in all of us that reality, that potential of goodness and holiness. But before we can clean up any of the ugliness on the face of the world, first of all, we have to acknowledge the fundamental goodness of the world, the integrity of God's creation. And in this struggle against evil, a particular profile of the saint emerges. And so while we often consider saints to be selflessly humble, submissively obedient, in reality, you met someone like Father Ephraim of Katunakia. In reality, the saint has a very clear sense of self, a very strong sense of will. The saint is neither narcissistically self-enlarged nor helplessly self-effaced. Both of these conditions are actually disorders. Both of these conditions are actually the opposite of humility. Humility is not a weakness that we should avoid. It's a force to be reckoned with. And also, saints are neither righteous overachievers nor spiritual gluttons. They're not self-indulgent in their sanctity. They neither patronize nor just please people. Easiest things to do in the church, to hide behind a religious facade for respect or for an image. But these are distortions of what an authentic human being is. These are distortions of what an authentic saint is. Ultimately, the saint is balanced. The saint acknowledges his or her vices, but also knows God's goodness. And finally, the saint is a person of his or her time, his or her place. This is important for us as Orthodox Christians today, because we often think to ourselves, if only I knew Father Paisios, it might have been different. If only I knew Father Sophronios, it might have been different. If only I lived in the time of the Hesychast fathers. If only I lived in the great golden age of the 4th century. If only we lived in the age of the martyrs. If only we could be disciples of Christ, then it might be different. The saint does not think like that. The saint never pines of the past, nor stresses about the future. The saint never wishes to be someone else, somewhere else, in some other time. The saint trusts in God. And the saint is convinced, in the expression of the 14th century English saint, Julian of Norwich, that all shall be well. That if we are, as Christ says, faithful in the few things, we can gain the kingdom of heaven. That's the legacy, the holy, the Catholic, the apostolic legacy of every saint. So let me close. The saints that the Patriarch recently announced as due to be canonized in either this synodal meeting or in the coming ones, they are saints for our time. But Saint Basil says that the life of the monk or the nun is nothing more than the life of the gospel. We could say the same about a saint, whether we lead a monastic life or not, and most of us do not. And although the outward conditions may be different, all of us are called to respond to the gospel, the same gospel. All of us are called to respond to holiness, to the same invitation of holiness. It's not a coincidence, by the way, that the monastic tonsure parallels baptism. The literal, the uncompromising application of the gospel by the saints is a reminder that all of us have to pass through the narrow gate. All of us have to bear the cross. Και κλείνω λέγοντας ότι η εμπειρία των Αγίων, η αγιότητα τελικά, είναι η εμπειρία ολόκληρης της Εκκλησίας, κάτω από την προοπτική της αιώνιας βασιλείας. Η χαρά λοιπόν που περιβάλλει την αναγνώριση ενός σημερινού Αγίου αντανακλά το ίδιο πνεύμα του ενθουσιασμού των πρώτων μαρτύρων. Γιατί αναβιώνει σε όλους μας το που λέει ο Απόστολος Παύλος για την κλίση να γίνουμε όλοι Άγιοι. The experience of the saints is, in the end, the experience of the whole church. It serves to illumine the whole world with the light of Christ. The first Christian saints were martyrs. And the word martyr is a Greek and Latin term that signifies witness, witness of an event. The saints are witnesses in the same way as the apostles were witnesses to the resurrection of Christ. And contemporary saints are the continuation of this Easter event, this joyful witness. The joy surrounding the canonization of a new saint awakens in all of us the same spirit of enthusiasm of the early church and its martyrs. When His All Holiness, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, announces the forthcoming recognition of beloved figures, admired figures from the recent past, we are especially encouraged because they are familiar, they are friendly individuals with whom we can identify, and because it revives in all of us the vocation to be saints.
Αφού ευχαριστήσουμε για άλλη μια φορά τον πατέρα Ιωάννη για την υπέροχη ομιλία του, την γεμάτη απλότητα και γεμάτα σπουδαία νοήματα, να καλέσω τον πατέρα Αλέξανδρο, που είναι εκπρόσωπος του Σεβασμιωτάτου Αρχιεπισκόπου μας σήμερα, για να κλείσει αυτή την πολύ όμορφη εκδήλωση.
Ο Σεβασμιότατος Αρχιεπίσκοπος μας απόψε βρίσκεται στο ναό της Αγίας Εκατερίνης, γιατί είναι και η εορτή της, μεθαύριο. Σας μεταφέρω τις ευχές του. Σήμερα ήταν μια ιδιαίτερα κουραστική μέρα και προηγουμένως ήμασταν με τον Υφυπουργό κάπου και σχεδόν κοιμόμουν στην ομιλία του και ερχόμενος εδώ έλεγα πώς θα αντέξω. Ο πατήρ όμως στην ομιλία του ήταν τόσο γλαφυρός και καταπληκτικός, τόσο σε αυτά που μας είπε ως νόημα και ουσία στην ομιλία, αλλά και ως τρόπος διήγησης και ομιλίας, που αισθανόμουν σαν να περπατούσα σε ένα κήπο με λουλούδια και μάζευα σε ανθοδέσμη αυτά που μας λέγατε. Κάτι αντίστοιχο λέει ο Άγιος Γρηγόριος, ο θεολόγος, ότι τα θεία φυτά του Παραδείσου ήταν οι λόγοι του Θεού, όπου ο άνθρωπος μπορούσε να μετέχει σε αυτά. Έτσι και σήμερα λοιπόν αισθάνθηκα ότι ήμουν μέσα σε ένα κήπο, σε ένα παράδεισο και μας προσφέρατε όλα αυτά τα άνθη και σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για αυτό και νομίζω όλοι, εγώ έχω ξεχάσει την κούραση της ημέρας, αισθάνομαι τόσο καλά που θα μπορούσα άλλο τόσο να σας ακούσω. Σας ευχαριστούμε λοιπόν πάρα πολύ, ευχαριστούμε όλους, τον κύριο Ευάγγελο Σωτηρόπουλο, τον άρχοντα εδώ, τους άρχοντες του Καναδά, τους υπόλοιπους, για την διοργάνωση της πνευματικής αυτής ομιλίας, τον πατέρα Φανούριο, τους πατέρες, έχουμε τον πατέρα Βιερόπουλο, ο οποίος είναι ο πρόεδρος του Συνδέσμου Κληρικών, και όλους εσάς που βρίσκεστε εδώ σήμερα μαζί μας. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Εάν θέλετε, μπορούμε να κλείσουμε με το... Να ψάρουμε το απολυτίκιο του Αγίου Νικολάου, του ναού εδώ.
Μισό λεπτό, καθίστε, ένα λεπτό, ναι. Αφού ευχαριστήσω και πάλι για άλλη μια φορά τον πατέρα Αλέξανδρο, τους πατέρες που κάνανε τον κόπο να έρθουν σήμερα εδώ, σε μια κουραστική μέρα για τους ιερείς, καθότι τα Σάββατα, ξέρετε, είναι μια ημέρα που όλοι οι ιερείς έχουν περισσότερες υποχρεώσεις. Αφού ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολύ για άλλη μια φορά τον αγαπητό φίλο, συνεργάτη και άρχοντα του Οικουμενικού μας Πατριαρχείου, Ευάγγελο Σωτηρόπουλο, για αυτή την πολύ όμορφη οργάνωση και την επιμονή του να κάνουμε αυτή την πολύ σπουδαία ομιλία. Αφού ευχαριστήσω την Πρόεδρο και το Εκκλησιαστικό Συμβούλιο της Εκκλησίας μας, αλλά και την φιλόπτωχο αδελφότητά μας που έχει ετοιμάσει για όλους σας κάτι, ένα κέρασμα, και παρακαλώ να κατεβούμε όλοι κάτω για να πάρετε κάτι, να μην φύγετε έτσι, και οι πατέρες και εσείς όλοι, με πολύ μεγάλη χαρά να σας φιλοξενήσουμε, και ό,τι είναι και ό,τι έχουμε είναι από την αγάπη της φιλοπτώχου αδελφότητάς μας και της Εκκλησίας μας και το πνεύμα της φιλοξενίας, το οποίο πρεσβεύουμε και αγαπούμε να το παρέχουμε με όλη μας την καρδιά σε όλους σας. Και, Πάτερ, έχετε το λόγο. Να είστε καλά.
Κανόνα πίστεως και εικόνα πραότητος, εγκρατείας διδάσκαλον ανέδειξεσαι την πίμνη σου, ή των πραγμάτων αλήθεια, δια τούτο εκτίσω τη ταπεινώση τα υψηλά, την πτωχία τα πλούσια. Πάτερ Ιεράρχα Νικόλαε, πρέσβευε Χριστό το Βαρθολομαίου, του Παναγιώτατου και Οικουμενικού Πατριάρχου, όλα τα έτη. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ και πάλι. Μας μεταφέρετε στο λόγιο κλίμα του Πατριαρχείου.
Θα ήθελα να καλέσω τους πατέρες όλους να έρθουν να πάρουμε μια φωτογραφία με τον πατέρα Ιωάννη.